That literally had not crossed my mind.
You're welcome. What can I say?
I'm gonna have to go slaughter some hogs to get that image out of my mind.
Exactly.
A lot changes in a week, Darren.
I think there's some truth to that.
The weather, for one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very true.
Winter time. Now we're going to be in the 80s in a day or two down here in Louisiana.
Thank you, Lord. I have no complaints.
And last week you were you were feeling pretty high. Vanderbilt men and women had huge wins, and this past weekend not so much the same results. How are you feeling today, Darren?
Just there was a Vanderbilt fan, and I can't remember who it was. It's somebody I follow on Twitter that um, tweeted a picture of like a little like animated little girl crying and looking like up like she was thinking back about something. It's like remembering that 5 days when both teams were ranked in the top 25 and had great wins. It's like, yeah, that pretty much sums it up. That's because the thing about it was top 25, both teams have great wins against Tennessee. And then both teams and Vanderbilt men didn't even play. The women at least had a midweek win. But then Saturday it was just like, no, we're good. We had a good 5 days. We're just gonna let this thing roll. It was hard to watch. It was very, very
Yeah.
difficult. But hopefully this week, hopefully this week will be a little bit different. But the SEC schedule, it's a gauntlet. So
I am sorry, and I mean that sincerely, because I can kind of relate after having watched the LSU men's basketball team this year.
yeah,
I told my wife the other day, I can't do this anymore, not this year. So
yeah.
I'm sticking strictly to the LSU women. Cannot watch the men right now. There's just too many things that are making me pull my hair out, which I
Yeah.
lost after my third child went through the teenage years. So it's gone already. So
God bless you.
speaking of women's basketball, let's talk a little bit about the SEC women's teams in the current top 25. Of course, South Carolina
Still
at
there.
number 2, holding on steady. And I think their next game is Georgia, which I don't see them losing that game at all. The Texas women at 4, LSU moved up to 6. Kentucky, which is playing very well, they had a big
Yeah,
win in Norman against Oklahoma
sure did.
at 11. Speaking of the Sooners or the Lady Sooners at number 15, Tennessee Volunteers, who have a huge matchup later this week against Connecticut.
Yep,
Connecticut is coming to Knoxville. They're
that's
holding
big.
steady at 19, Alabama at 23, and your Vanderbilt Lady Commodores at number 24.
Thank goodness for that midweek win. Kept them in the top 25.
On the men's side of things, we have Auburn. Still,
Oof.
what this the SEC this year is ridiculously tough.
Yeah, sure is.
Particularly when you look at the 3 highest ranked SEC teams: Auburn, Alabama, and Tennessee.
Yep.
Goodness gracious, Auburn just keeps finding a way to win. Alabama is so strong. They've got the experience, the veteran leadership.
Yep.
Tennessee, does anyone play defense as well as Tennessee?
No. No, and their games this past weekend showed that. Their game against Florida this past weekend showed just how strong they are.
And I'm a little surprised that Florida, after getting shellacked by a Tennessee team that
Yeah,
I think you pointed out, Darren, only had 7 scholarship players dress that game,
and
and they
Florida's
lost by
held.
20.
Yeah, and held to 44. Didn't just lose by 20. It wasn't, 86-66. They were held to 44 points. And still, what are the top 10? Yeah, still in the top
Yeah.
10, number
I'm,
6.
I'm surprised. I'm surprised they're number
Yep.
6.
Yep.
A&M at 10, Kentucky at 14. They dropped a little bit after that loss to Arkansas, which we'll talk
Ooh,
about in a
yeah.
minute. I think we got some graphics to
Yep.
talk
Yep.
about that. Missouri at 15, Mississippi State 22, and Ole Miss at 25.
And Vanderbilt not there. Shame on
but they're
Vanderbilt.
in the overall rankings. They're still above the LSU men's team.
they still are in the SEC standings above the LSU men and the South Carolina men, I think. So we'll
Every school has down years.
absolutely.
I look at LSU men and I think this is the school where Bob Pettit played, where Pete Maravich played, where Shaquille O'Neal played. Three of the all-time greats.
Yep.
Dale Brown had a great run
Whew, have
at
mercy.
LSU. With the resources and the money, it's one of those head scratchers. Like,
Yeah, it really
is,
is.
is it the players? Is it the coaching? What's going on here? Something is not clicking. I know they had a big loss early in the year to
Yep.
injury, but I don't know. It happens to everybody at some point.
It's difficult to watch, but it does. It does not matter. I mean, this year Vanderbilt is super excited, obviously, making it into the top 25, had an incredible non-conference run. Obviously, I think doing better in the conference than anybody expected with wins over Tennessee and Kentucky. This past weekend was standing, not the greatest, especially the second half. The second half was so horrible this past weekend. But, I mean, look at the run that they just went through. They went through a 7-8 year period where there was one NCAA tournament appearance, maybe two NIT appearance, had two out of 7 years where they went winless in the conference, lost the streak of the having a 3-point field goal in every game since it had been instituted. Was it them and Princeton and UNLV, I think it is, that had that goal or had that record running, and Vanderbilt lost that. I think that was 3 or 4 years ago. So they went through some, not just an ugly spot, but a record-breaking ugly spot at times. It happens to every school. It's hard to watch, but it happens to every school. To your point,
Yeah. Well, let's move away from that and talk about
yeah.
something else. Uh, let's talk a little bit about the Arkansas Kentucky game. A triumphant return to
Wow,
Lexington for John Calipari. Arkansas easily played its best game of the
by
season.
far.
55.2% shooting from the field. Even more impressive, 52% from
For
three-point
3 point,
range.
yeah.
I think heading into the Kentucky game, Arkansas was averaging maybe 6 trays a game.
Yep.
They just were on fire that game.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to a very disheartened Kentucky fan, and she said, "What happened to the Wildcats?" And I said, "Look, you guys just caught a red hot Arkansas team.
Yep.
It was their night. They were on fire, and they weren't going to be beat.
No.
So it's very disappointing, I know, for fans in Lexington who were hoping for a big win. I wish they would have treated Coach Cal, a little better than the boos. I thought that was
A bit
unwarranted.
much. Yep. Yep.
You appreciate the good that he did
Yep.
there. He moved on. You moved on.
Yep.
So let's show a little bit more class than that. But kudos to Arkansas and the job that Coach Cal did. They came in and they took
Yeah.
care of business.
And the thing that was impressive, like you said, not only was it by far their best game of the year, it was their most complete game from every angle. As you talked about, their shooting was incredible, but their defense was incredible. 10 steals, created 14 turnovers, or there were 14 turnovers with Kentucky. And when you look at that kind of completeness package, assist to turnovers, they had a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. I guarantee you they haven't sniffed that ratio of 2-to-1 this entire season, not even close. And and
Mm-mm.
and really, really did it well. I mean, you could tell they were clicking from every angle. It was a complete game from beginning to end.
Big win for the Razorbacks. Tough loss for the Wildcats, but there's a lot more basketball to be played.
Yep,
So
that's
let's move
exactly right.
on to our next item tonight, which is a breakdown of the Tennessee Florida game. Now, this one flew a little bit under the radar
Yep.
because Saturday you had, of course, the marquee game at night was the Kentucky Arkansas game, and
Hmm.
before that you had Duke North Carolina, which proved to be a complete dud of a
Oh,
game.
have mercy.
Yet this game, I think, revealed a lot about this Tennessee Volunteer team.
Yeah.
Down significant players, They came out. Zachary Ziegler, their all everything guard, was
Yeah,
out for the game. Florida has been playing extremely well. Tennessee came out. They shut Florida down. Look at that field goal
yeah,
percentage, 24.5. You can say Florida had a bad day shooting. The Tennessee defense probably had something to do with that.
exactly, exactly.
3-point percentage, less than 15%.
Yep.
So really impressive. This was a master class from Coach Rick Barnes.
Yeah, to me, that's the thing that stands out the most. And of course, uh, even with it being in Tennessee, we have not hidden that you know, Rick Barnes, you just make me love you. I can't, it makes me lose my mind. But you got to get, this is, like you said, it was a master class because you're down to 7 scholarship players. Zakai Siegler is an absolute floor coach, floor general, whatever term you want to put on him, he earns it. He demonstrates it week in and week out, and he's not there. And when you hold a number 6 team in the country, which I know they were even higher than that, but when you hold a top 10 team in the country to 44 points, there is, like you said, there's defensive design that does that. That's not just a poor night shooting, because when you've got shooters, they're going to keep shooting because eventually that lid's going to come off the basket. Even if it's a late run, something's going to happen most of the time in a poor night shooting where a shooter finds a stroke, finds his rhythm. And it just never happened. And you could tell they created turnovers, they created steals, they did everything you need them to do. They out rebounded, eliminated those second chance shots, those in the paint points, things like that. They defensively did everything they needed to do. And yes, you have to have talent to win in the SEC, but to win with the deficit of players they had and the way they did, you got to give it to coaching. You absolutely have to give that to Rick Barnes. He showed what he can do even in the most difficult of circumstances. It was hard as a Vanderbilt person to watch, but it was impressive to watch. You could not be anything but be impressed with what they did with that game.
Certainly, the word impressive is the word you used, and that is right on the money, Darren. Very impressive outing by Tennessee.
Yep, very much so.
Well, let's talk a little bit about headlines for this week. And I want to go to Columbus, Ohio. I know that's out of the SEC. Still, Ohio State won the national
That's
championship,
right.
so we've talked about them recently. However, there are some major changes underfoot in
Just a couple.
Columbus. We talked about their defensive coordinator, Knowles, going to Penn State. Now, Chip Kelly, their offensive coordinator, has left to go to the Las Vegas Raiders. I had to go through the. Wait, is it? No,
Yeah.
not Oakland Raiders. It's not
Oakland,
Los
LA.
Angeles Raiders. It's okay. Las Vegas Raiders.
Yep.
This got me thinking. In the middle of the night, I woke up with this thought, Darren. Do you remember one of those classic 1980s movies, Can't Buy Me Love,
Oh yeah.
where the guy named Ronald, he's not in the in crowd, so he pays a girl to pretend to be his boy or his girlfriend, and that opens up all these doors for him. And once the gig is up and they found out he paid for this, it all falls apart. And I'm not saying Ryan Day is Ronald, but the friends that he paid to be there, they're all gone. The
They're
dance is
gone.
over.
Yep.
They're gone.
Yep.
So who are his new friends going to be?
Was there a scene in that movie where she rode like on the back of his lawnmower or something like that? I cannot believe you brought that movie up because now I have an image of Ryan Day driving the ride lawnmower and Chip Kelly standing up on the back. I don't know that I'll ever get that out of my head, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you putting that in all of our heads now. Thank you.
I'm not taking that by myself. Everybody gets to share that.
That literally had not crossed my mind.
You're welcome. What can I say?
I'm gonna have to go slaughter some hogs to get that image out of my mind.
Exactly. Well, sorry about that. I had to share it. I couldn't. It wouldn't go away, so I had to share it to get rid of it. Did it surprise you a little bit that Kelly went back to the NFL? To me, that's kind of the only surprise here. I expected him maybe to try the head coach route again in college, not in the NFL. But I don't. That caught me off guard. That's like I said. That's the only element of this that surprises me a little bit.
My impression of Chip Kelly over the years is he's a terrific offensive mind.
Mm-hmm.
He enjoys X's and O's. He enjoys coaching. The game, though, has changed in the
Yeah.
NIL era, and I think one thing that Chip Kelly has never enjoyed is recruiting.
Yeah.
And now with NIL and how coaches are now having to adapt, I think he wanted to go somewhere where he could just coach.
Yeah.
The NFL, you don't have to woo recruits. You don't have to, you know, placate and uh, heap compliments on. Flattery is what I was trying to think of.
Yeah.
So I think he just went to a place where he could simply be a coach.
That's a great
So
point.
that's my impression. I might be off on that, but that's kind of what I thought of Chip Kelly over the years.
And that absolutely makes sense because obviously he's shown that he's kind of tired of the NIL era and doesn't have any interest in being a head coach again because he walked away from a head coaching gig to be the offensive coordinator. So that's a great point. It's still just I don't know. Things just never really seem to mesh in the NFL. I mean, obviously he did a little bit better than let's say Steve Spurrier. There might be a couple other coaches that I could think of that didn't go well in the college or in the NFL world, but it didn't seem to mesh. So that it caught me a little off guard. But that's a great point.
I don't see Chip Kelly being a head coach in the NFL. I think
No.
this is his sweet spot, being an offensive coordinator, and he does very well at it. And I think he'll do
Mhm.
well as an OC back in the NFL.
And no matter what level of ball, he can innovate the game. And when that's
Mhm.
all he has to worry about, yeah, that'll probably be a benefit to everybody involved.
Exactly, exactly.
Great point.
Yeah.
Great point.
Well, speaking of the NFL, we have a Super Bowl coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Philadelphia, Kansas City. Do you have a team?
I do. For no reason other than Philadelphia has two Vanderbilt guys. So go Eagles. That's all I got. I don't. And nobody on the Eagles has been asked when they were going to propose to somebody. So that makes me lean toward the Eagles too. How about you?
Before I give my pick, who I'd like to see win this, I just want to point out that LSU has the nation's longest Super Bowl streak, 24 years of having at least one player in the Super Bowl. That's the longest streak in college football. I just wanted to point that out
Nice.
real quick for our viewers. Like you, Darren, I'm leaning toward the Eagles. I do like Andy Reid and the job he's done at Kansas City.
Yeah.
They're a heck of a team. They're tough to beat. I like Jalen Hurts though, and I think Jalen Hurts is
Hmm.
he takes a lot of bad press
Yeah.
back from the whole situation with Tua, Alabama, in which he eventually left and went to Oklahoma. But Jalen Hurts is your prototype competitor. He's a football player.
Hmm.
He's not afraid to take hits. He's not afraid to do the dirty work. And so there's a part of me that would like to. I'm not an Eagles fan by any stretch of the
No.
imagination. There's a part of me that would like to see him get that ring, that Super Bowl trophy.
Agree. I think that would be absolutely fantastic. I think Vanderbilt had a similar streak, by the way. I think they went 37 years without having a player in the NFL. No, I'm kidding. That's not true. Might have been 27, but anyway.
I'm thankful that you're friends with all the Vanderbilt listeners that that watch this show, because they would be offended if they didn't know you.
They know it's truth, even if they don't.
Oh man. So let's talk about some football grades. Always loved getting report cards in school. How about you, Darren?
Yes, it was my. I know this is going to surprise you, But my card always had, uh, might call them suspect grades, but usually included something to the effect. You remember the old school handwritten cards where they wrote it in, and then there was a comment section down at the bottom. My comment section always had something to the effect of, if Darren studied half as much as he talked, he'd be a straight A student. I saw that more than once.
Well, who's laughing now? You're a
That's
famous sports
That's
podcaster.
exactly right. And I made an A. You take that.
These grades come from Brad Crawford from CBS Sports, and the A's he gave one A or two A's. I'm
Two A's.
sorry, Texas and Tennessee,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Georgia A minus, South Carolina A minus, and then your B's. I'm not big for these minuses and pluses. It
Me
just
neither.
so. Uh, any surprises on here? I thought he was a little harsh with Mississippi State, considering that's Levy's in the middle of a major rebuild. Uh,
Yeah,
that was,
to put single out Mississippi State as an elf, when I mean obviously their season was worse than, especially, let's say Kentucky, but when you look at the fact where Jeff Levy is in the build versus where Kentucky and Stoops are in the build, uh, I think I'd come closer to giving it to Kentucky a F before I would Mississippi State, truthfully. Now, I'm not saying Mississippi State should be given a B because it was the first year and they've been in a tough circumstance. No, they still had a bad season. There's no disputing that. But I think knowing everything that's going on and it's in their first year, I think that's a little rough to give them an F. Like I said, truthfully, I think I would have come much closer to giving Kentucky or even Auburn an F before I would Mississippi State. But yeah, I agree with you. That's one of the ones that really stood out to me. Uh, and truthfully, the other thing, like I said, I think if somebody jumped out to me to give an F, it would have been Kentucky. Truthfully, I think that would have been the only F. If I did that, I think that would be the only F I would give.
how do you feel Vanderbilt getting a B plus? That puts him ahead of Florida, A&M, Ole Miss, Arkansas, Alabama, LSU. Are you feeling pretty good about that grade, Darren, or are you disappointed they didn't give you an A?
No, and honestly, just to be very, I think fair in the assessment. I think a B is probably a fair level. But when you look at the fact that Florida and A&M are both Bs, Vanderbilt probably just strictly off of the way they finished. You know, when they started losing their health, for lack of a better term, they weren't healthy. They really went on a slide there toward the end, and then recovered at the Georgia Tech game. I think a B minus still would have been fair for Vanderbilt if they'd have finished a little bit stronger. I think a B plus. But again, when you look at expectation where they were last year, I can see a B plus. I don't think it's unreasonable, and I'll take it every day of the week. How do you feel about LSU being at a C? Do you think that's kind of a fair? They're middle of the road, or should they have been a little bit higher?
That's probably in line with how most of us as LSU fans felt about this
Okay.
season. The debacle at A&M, it
Yeah.
just there were so many there were lapses throughout the
Hmm.
season,
Hmm.
particularly against teams with running quarterbacks. That and I know Blake Baker, he's fashioning the defense. He's trying to put all the pieces together. LSU definitely underperformed compared to expectations. So I
Yep.
think a C is completely fair for LSU. It wasn't what we wanted. I was also though a little surprised, Darren, at how high South Carolina got ranked, an A minus.
Yeah.
I just not sure about that. They blew the game at Alabama at
Hmm.
Tuscaloosa. They should have won that game.
Yep.
They got blown out by Ole Miss at
Yep.
home. So I'm a little surprised that they were ranked so high because I would not put them in the same class as the Texas, Georgia, and Tennessee.
And the thing that that I don't understand about the ranking is I think when you look at South Carolina, I think he gives them an A minus based off of expectation. Where you thought they were, especially a couple of games into the season, and then how they finished, even with those couple of dips. I mean, I think he factored that in, and I think he did. Obviously, he did the same thing with Vanderbilt. Where expectations were, where how the season ended up. I think he let those two things kind of equally grade out. But then at the same time, I don't think he did that with Missouri. I don't see with the expectations that Missouri had at the start of the year. How do you give them? Yes, they turned some things around. Things got a little bit better, but I don't think there's any way you call that a B plus season based off
Mhm.
of where the expectations were at the start of the year. Might have been a B, might have been a B minus, but I don't think it was a B plus season. And also at the same time, if you're going to allow expectations to judge some and not others, or you should, I guess, put it across the board if you're going to let it creep into how you grade some schools. I think that goes back to our Mississippi State. I don't think there's any way you give them an F, based off of where they were, what the expectations were, to say, oh well, obviously that was an F. Uh, so to me, the Mississippi, or rather the Missouri one, stands out to me as well. As I feel like he just said, okay, well, they're Missouri, they did this, we'll give them a B plus, a B plus. Well, they're Missouri coming off a 10-win season. There was conversation about them sneaking into the SEC, the championship game, and how if this was old school East and West, how they'd be at the top and all this kind of stuff, and then that's not how the season turned out.
A couple changes I would make. I'd probably move South Carolina to a B. I'd move Missouri to a C. I'd
Mhm.
move Arkansas to a C, and probably keep
Yeah.
the rest of those that same way. I think when you look at some of the D's, those three programs, Auburn, Oklahoma, and Kentucky, we could argue that those three coaches, Hugh Freeze, Brent Venables, and Mark Stoops,
Hmm.
their coaching seats are on fire right now.
Absolutely.
They will not survive if if they don't do better, significantly
Hmm.
better in
Absolutely.
2025.
And and Brent Venables did the ultimate acknowledgement of how hot his seat is by saying, "Yeah, I'm going to be calling that defense. We're not going. We're not going to put this in somebody else's hands. This is the guy calling the defense next year." I think that very much is an acknowledgement of just how hot his seat is, and he knows it.
Yeah, if he's going to go down, he's going to be at the helm if he
Yeah,
goes down.
Ranger in my
So
hand. Absolutely.
I asked our resident faithful Oklahoma fan, Zach, who has listened to us since day one.
Hmm.
So, what do you think about Venables taking over the defensive play calling?
Oh,
And
okay.
here's what he said. I want to share with you what he sent back to me in the text message. He says, "I think this is the best thing for them to do. It could work if they have assistants in place to help him out with some of the head coach stuff like clock management.
Mhm.
For a win or die season for Brent Venables, probably the best thing for him to do."
And that is one of the concerns you have to have is, okay, how does this work where you're the head coach and you're the D coordinator? It's what Clark Lee did, but exactly what Zach is talking about. The reason Clark Lee was able to pull it off is he basically to it. He had a head coach on the offensive side of the ball. So there literally is an offensive head coach and a defensive head coach. You have to have something like that in place for it to work.
And the question is, does OU have that in place?
Right. Yeah.
We'll find
And
out.
the season will bear that out, absolutely. And
Yeah.
just to go back, you're right. I can't believe I left them all to the list. As much as we love Coach Pittman, there is no way Arkansas had a B minus season. They had a B minus offense, but they did not have a B minus season. There's just absolutely no way.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. So let us know what your thoughts are on the SEC report card. And while you're formulating your thoughts, go ahead and hit that like button, that subscribe button. We appreciate it so much when you take the time to do that. It helps us out in the internet world, and I don't understand how algorithms work. Darren does. He could write a book and explain it to you, but it helps when you subscribe. So
And you
thank
still
you.
wouldn't know anything.
If you'll go ahead and do that right now, we'd appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Another list that came out this week, Darren, that you and I have had discussions concerning is the top 4 team playoff champions. So this starts in 2014
Hmm.
when the playoffs, uh, that particular iteration was a 4-team playoff. And this is coming from Chip Patterson, again, CBS Sports, who ranked these teams. Now, this got me all in a tizzy right away.
It did not hit you in the feels in any way.
There's no argument I have yet to hear
Hmm.
that puts anybody above that 2019 LSU team. When you look at margin of victory, when you look at the offensive production that they put together, look at the guys that have left from there, and now look how well that they are continuing to do. The depth of the level of talent is astounding. Whenever someone brings this up, and I don't understand Patterson's logic at all. I don't know why they feel the need to prop up a 2020 Alabama team.
No.
They finished 13-0. The 2019 LSU team finished 15-0. I think they beat 7 out of 10 top 10, 7 top 10 teams that
You're
year.
right.
Uh, it was a beautiful moment that is so seldom replicated.
Yep.
I refer people back to a response that Mike Greenberg made, in which he completely laid out the case for why the 2019 LSU Tigers are the best college football team ever. I encourage you to Google that, Mike Greenberg, LSU 2019 team, and listen to his argument. It's an ironclad argument. He lays it all out in just a couple of minutes. Darren, do I have your support on this? Do I have your vote on
Oh,
this?
oh, completely and totally. The fact that you can make this list, I mean, there are other, to me, also very glaringly obvious, what were you thinking? Places on this list as well. For instance, 2023 Michigan at number 6.
Mhm.
Come on, are you serious? But the flip, and I think it's a flip. I honestly am okay with 2020 Alabama being the number 2 team of the 10 that we're looking at. I think the 2 Georgia teams have a fair argument to say, not so fast, my friend. But I'm okay with that. It doesn't hurt my feelings for Alabama to be number 2. But to flip those and put LSU number 2 is just absolutely insane. I don't know any other way to say it. And, truthfully, I don't think Clemson at 3 was better than both of those Georgia teams at 21 and 22.
No,
You
no, not at
might
all.
be able to say an argument of, well, they slid in a little bit better over one than the other, but I don't even like that argument. I think Clemson is at best 5, and just because their offense was so prolific that year. I mean, they did have almost 8,000 yards of offense that year, and they had a pretty impressive margin of victory against ACC teams. But anyway, we'll leave that part unsaid. So I can see them being a top 5 team, maybe, but definitely not a top 3. That doesn't make sense to me at all. Um, I think you could legitimately say LSU 1, 2020 Alabama 2, Georgia, Alabama. Now we'll let Michigan, Ohio State, and the 2 Clemson teams fight it out for those bottom 4 spots. And I think if you really took a hard look at offense, defense allowed, margin of victory, strength of opponent, I think you would be hard pressed to really say that was a dumb ordering to put the SEC teams as the top 6. I think it's a legitimate. You can make a legitimate case for it.
Yeah, I just about agree with that. I put LSU 2019 first, 2020 Alabama second. I put the 2 Georgia teams 3 and 4.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I definitely put the Alabama teams above Michigan,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
and maybe Clemson in between those 2 teams.
Mm-hmm.
I think Michigan is way too high on this ranking.
Yeah,
I think that
that's
2018 Clemson team is too high on this ranking.
agree completely. The only two he got definitively right is the last two. I don't have an argument with those at all.
Right.
9 and 10. Yeah, it makes sense to me. I'll go
Yep.
with that. Which actually, truthfully, if you wanted to be honest, he didn't even really get those right because Michigan should actually be 10. I don't think there's any way in this world that 2023 Michigan team is higher than 10 when compared to these other teams.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely agree with you on that. Let us know what you think. Who are your
Absolutely.
top 10 college football champions in the 14 playoff area 51?
Area 51. This was area 10, not 51.
Oh, look at the time. We are digressing. It must be time to wrap this show up. Remember,
Exactly.
new episodes come out. Well, this week it comes out on Wednesday.
On Wednesday.
And here's the reason why, in case you've forgotten. Darren and I both have full-time jobs. We do this for fun. Sometimes our full-time jobs pull us away from our typical recording times, and so we have to adapt, and we appreciate you adapting with
Absolutely.
us. So sometimes our episodes come out a little later, and that's the reason why. So we appreciate you looking for the episodes every week, listening, watching. Please subscribe if you haven't, and let a friend know about the Brew and Shaver Sports Podcast.
Absolutely.
Enjoy the Super Bowl this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And until next week, y'all take care.
Have a great week.
Thank you for making the Brew and Shaver Sports Podcast your go-to sports show. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review our show if you haven't already. Your feedback is so important. Let us know what you think about this week's show. Send an email to brewandshavers@gmail.com or a text to our text line 318-390-3599. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you again for listening to the Brew and Shaver Sports Podcast. See you next week.